The mountain men and fur trappers of the early 1800s were much different than the European settlers that came later. They weren't there to settle permanently or to build roads or buildings. They were usually just passing through, hunting beaver and adventure. This being the case, they had a unique relationship with the various tribes that they had interactions with while traveling through their lands. Mountain men weren't there to change life for Native Americans in any way. Usually it was the opposite, with mountain men frequently adopting native clothing and language, marrying into tribes. They would adopt traditions and ways of life, and would even fight alongside them. This story is of one such case, where a party of mountain men and Shoshone warriors joined together to fight their common enemy, the feared and ferocious tribe, the Blackfeet. This story comes from the autobiography My 60 Years on the Plains by William Thomas Hamilton, also known as Wildcat Bill. This account comes from Bill's first expedition into the Great Plains, the same one in which he accompanied the Cheyenne on a buffalo hunt, an experience I also made a video on. After the group of trappers left the Cheyenne, they moved west, interacting with different tribes and trapping beaver. The group made it into the Wind River country, and during one of the nights they were ambushed by the Blackfeet. The Blackfeet were a powerful northwestern plains tribe that controlled land from modern-day Edmonton, Alberta, down to Yellowstone Park, and from Glacier Park all the way to the Black Hills, a huge area. The Blackfeet were a fierce warrior tribe and one of the most aggressive tribal groups in North America. Most mountain men's worst fears was to be caught unaware by a war party of Blackfeet. Wildcat Bill and his party got into a small skirmish with the Blackfeet and managed to kill a few of them and push them back. This was Bill's first time in combat, and he killed and scalped one of the warriors. The men knew, however, that they were not safe yet, and that the Blackfeet would be back likely in larger numbers. The leader of their party, Bill Williams, decided that they should stay in the area and search for a party of mountain men or Shoshones and join up with them, as Williams knew that there would be Shoshones in the area, and he had some friends among them. After a few days of searching, the men spotted a scouting party of Shoshones. They approached the party, firing one shot into the air to send the message that they were friendly. Bill Williams happened to know some of the Shoshones in the party, and they were excited to see him. They invited him and his men into their village. The Shoshone originated in the Great Basin and spread into what is now Nevada, Utah, Idaho, and Wyoming, and split into four main cultural groups, with various tribal bands, with the famous Comanche tribe of Texas originally being a Shoshone offshoot. The Shoshone Wildcat Bill and his party had met up with were Eastern Shoshone, and they were fierce enemies of the Blackfeet. The Shoshone scouting party was very excited to see that the men had Blackfeet scalps, and said that they had 7 horses stolen from their camp by the Blackfeet, and suggested that they join up for safety. They said that their band was a day's ride behind them. Bill Williams gave the scouts 2 Blackfeet scalps as a sign of goodwill, and they planned to see each other the next day. The next morning, the Shoshones arrived and set up their camp surrounding the mountain men. This band of Shoshone was led by the legendary chief Washki, who was an old friend of Bill Williams and was said to be feared by the Blackfeet. The mountain men and Shoshones then began trading, with Wildcat Bill saying that the Shoshone were eager to trade for anything that had belonged to the slain Blackfeet, with Bill himself trading the scalp he had taken for a fine horse. At night, the Shoshones kept watch for Blackfeet or Pend d'Oreille, also known as Kalispel natives, as they would frequently raid this area in the summer, and they were enemies of the Shoshone and of each other. The next day, 2 parties of Shoshone on horseback were sent out to scout for enemies. One of these parties came back with 3 trappers. The men had originally been a party of 5, but 2 of their party were caught by the Blackfeet while setting beaver traps. They were killed, scalped, and mutilated. The 3 survivors were able to hold off the Blackfeet from a secure spot in some woods, but had all their horses stolen, and were lucky that it was the Shoshones that had found them. The 3 men were welcomed into Bill Williams' party. The other scouting party then returned and reported that they had fought with a war party of Pend d'Oreilles, with 2 Shoshones being slightly wounded and seemingly proud of their wounds. The Shoshones and mountain men decided to stay in this camp for the next few days. This was Wildcat Bill's first time meeting the Shoshones, so he spent his time practicing his sign talk, visiting all the lodges and teepees, and generally learning all he could about the Shoshone. Meanwhile, the Shoshones had been sending out constant scouting parties to look for enemies. These parties kept reporting signs of enemy war parties, but could find none. This concerned Chief Washki as well as Bill Williams, as there could be any number of enemy tribes in the area posing a threat to the village. They held a council and decided to send out 3 war parties of 25 men each to find any surrounding enemy and then come together and fight them. Men from the trappers would be in each war party. The next morning they departed, with Wildcat Bill and Bill Williams' party making their way to Bull Lake, which is now in the modern-day Wind River Reservation. They were able to find fresh pony tracks of an unknown number of warriors, as the enemy was riding in single file. 3 young Shoshones were going ahead to scout, when the men heard gunfire from the east side of the Wind River. One of the war parties had engaged the enemy. The men rode to a hill where they were able to see a group of enemy warriors running for a high ridge in the direction where they had heard the shots. They rode under the cover of trees for half a mile until they reached a hill that went up to the ridge. They stopped, and the Shoshones stripped down to just their breechclouts and mounted their war horses. Then a chief named Moonhavi led the charge up the hill. Within 200 yards, there were 14 ponies being watched by 2 young men. They were Blackfeet. Their comrades on the ridge were out of range and could do nothing to help them. The Shoshones let out their war cries and charged the 2 young men who were trying to mount their horses. They were killed and scalped. Seeing this, the Blackfeet on the ridge made a break for some thick cottonwoods on the other side of the Wind River. The Shoshones and mountain men went charging after them, with Wildcat Bill saying, quote, "When the Indians scattered, they were about 250 yards ahead, and if the scene that followed could have been reproduced on canvas, it would have been worth a fortune. It was a scene that occurs only in actual warfare." The Blackfeet were outnumbered by at least 2 to 1, and they dropped blankets and their war bags, hoping that the Shoshones would stop and pick them up. But they charged right past them, and for a few chaotic moments, bullets, arrows, and war cries filled the air. Wildcat Bill, Bill Williams, and Moonhave had the fastest horses, and reached the Blackfeet first, with Williams killing the first warrior, and Bill and Moonhave both shooting and missing. Wildcat Bill then charged a tall warrior. They fired at the same time, with Bill killing the man, and the warrior's arrow going into the shoulder of Bill's horse. There were 3 Blackfeet left who were fighting hand-to-hand with 3 young Shoshones, before some older men stepped in and quickly killed the Blackfeet. They then began scalping and looting their fallen enemies. They then went back to the Blackfeet's horses. 7 of them had been stolen from the Shoshone. 5 belonged to the ambushed trappers, and there were 2 extras that went to Bill Williams' party. The Shoshones had some wounded who were sent back to the village. The rest of the men headed east towards shots coming from the other war party. They found the other Shoshones gathered, discussing what to do next. One Shoshone was dying from a bullet in the lungs, and 3 others were wounded. They had been fighting 9 Blackfeet who had gotten a good defensive position among some rocks and had been holding off the Shoshones. They then held a quick council and decided to attack from 2 sides. 6 men were left for cover fire, and the rest of the men charged. The 9 Blackfeet were all quickly overwhelmed and killed. A man named Evans had his cheek split open by an arrow, and several of the Shoshones were wounded. After patching themselves up, they headed back to the village, and in a final quote from the book, it says, "Now there was a mixture of joy and sorrow blended together, the relatives of the dead man mourning and making the night hideous with dismal howls, others singing, yelling, and sending forth war whoops, parading the village, and recounting in detail all the incidents pertaining to the fight and the extermination of those, quote, dogs of Blackfeet."